Hello, friends of Studio Brule. This is Steve Brule, and it is coffee time where we go over some of the things that have come across my desk in the last couple of days. You can see my VIP club membership to the patriarchy card on display, which authorizes me to comment on the comings and goings of the evil feminist empire that has spread its thousands of tentacles all the way around the world. And today we have a very special guest, Erin Pizzey, who is the originator of the very first of the global women's shelter movement, and when she opened her refuge in 1971 in Chiswick, London, England. And that was the beginning of a very interesting life for her Erin, and a series of, I guess it's been a battle for 50 years. Erin has written 22 books, and the feminists took over her refuge and kicked her out when she learned in the very early days of the refuge movement that about 60 or so of the first 100 women who came into her refuge were actually as violent or the initiator in the domestic violence. And with no further ado, I'm going to bring Erin straight into the stream here. Hello, Erin.
Hello.
Did I get some of that right in your introduction?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. You have to. It's Chiswick. It's a difficult one, isn't it?
Oh, Chiswick. It does have a W in there.
Oh, this is why English is so difficult, isn't it? No, it is Chiswick. Yes.
Chiswick.
And it actually next year is the 50th anniversary of the refuge.
Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Is that refuge still running?
Well, yes, because now it's called itself Refuge, and the woman who took it over was the woman who engineered my loss of the refuge, Sandra Hawley, and I realized quite quickly when I wrote her a letter saying, "Can I help you? Let me know in any way if I can be of use." She wrote a very cold little letter back and said, well, all women are innocent victims, so there's no need for any therapeutic programs. And she closed down all the programs because I had a lot of programs for boys, particularly boys. They had their own house. And for long stay, these are women who normally would have lost their children to social services, had them adopted. They could stay as long as they needed to. And I had several other long stay refuges all over the country, but they were all closed down.
Oh, I didn't know you had a series of them.
Yeah,
I might just comment, your face is half off to the side. Yes, there we go. I'm sure the audience wants to see your full face. There we go. Perfect. Okay. I didn't realize that you had a series of them. Were you kicked out of all of them at the same time?
Yes, the whole thing was closed down. We were the biggest squatting agency in England, because as the women poured in from all over England, the various, we call them boroughs, that's the areas they came from, said, oh no, if you come to me, for instance, from Liverpool, there's no way the Hounslow borough is going to rehouse a Liverpool woman. And so that's why we were so grossly overcrowded always. So we took the decision, because those days it was legal. And we began to squat big empty houses that had been done up by the local councils and left with nobody in them. So it didn't take us long, because what you do is you pack up your mums and kids, and we had a lorry. In the middle of the night, you just drive up in front of the house, having organized a key. We won't go into how, and unlock the door. And then the moment you get in, you put a notice outside for the police to say this is a legal squat. And you cannot evict us without a civil court order. And because it was civil, nobody in the boroughs would want to actually rehouse something like 20 mothers and all their children. That's why we took very big houses. And in fact, at the height of our squatting, we not only owned several roads, but we also owned the Royal Park Hotel, and that was in Richmond. The Palm Court Hotel. It was a very famous hotel in its time, and it had something like 45 private suites.
Erin, were there a lot of empty big houses in those days?
Yeah,
London, Chiswick, England. That's a posh area, isn't it?
But it wasn't only Chiswick. No, it was all over. You know, owned houses all over. Yes, what they used to do is do them up and then not get around to letting them. And certainly we managed to hurry them up quite a lot. And remember, I promised a whole group of mothers that we would get them rehoused before Christmas. Now, right at the back of Chiswick itself was a whole row of what had been workmen's cottages. And they had been done up, and they were supposed to be renting them, but they didn't. So what we did is we filled them full of mothers and children. And I anticipated what Hounslow would do because they were vicious towards us. So what we did is we put all the camping equipment in. So we had portable loos, we had camping gas cookers, we had camping heaters, all the rest of it. And as Hounslow found out that we were in those houses, they sent the men to cut off the gas and electricity. And it was a lovely sight, and for the men, because they didn't want to do it to us. Because as they turned it all off, they could see the lights coming up in all the little houses in front of them.
You had planned well ahead.
Oh, we had to. Look, you know, we were past masters at it all.
Yeah, I can see that.
How we survived.
And you detailed a lot of this in this book, This Way to the Revolution. Is that right?
Yes.
I read this book a few years back. It's very worth reading, folks. It's the history of how how Erin started. Well, it's more than just the refuge movement, but it does go into quite a lot of detail about what Erin's talking about right now and the beginnings of the refuge movement and the struggles with both officials and the feminist takeover of the movement.
Yes, it does. And it's very interesting. It took me 10 years to get that book published. And I found a publisher by accident. And I was very lucky. Antonia was my editor. And she had no political axe to grind with anybody. And they produced this book very well. And she believed that it would be highly, what's the right word? Old lady forgets.
Well received?
Reviewed, that was it. And I said to her, I'll bet you there won't be one single review. She said, oh, Erin, you're paranoid. Which is what everybody says to me. Guess what? Not one single review.
They hate you for pointing out that women can be violent.
They being gender feminists, yes, from the very beginning.
That's who I was referring to, yeah. Yeah,
it's a huge battle. It's still going on because what happens now all the way across the Western world, you see, is they've had 50, well, no, because it was 1974 when we had a little conference. We'd never had a conference before, but we were hoping to ask other groups to come and visit with us so we could all share what was happening and our knowledge. Well, unbeknown to us, because we were just naive, and I was a housewife with 2 kids and 2 dogs. And so were the mothers in the refuge. So we went down to our little church hall where we were holding it. And lo and behold, in come this wave of women. And they took over the whole conference. And they just started voting themselves into the National Federation of Women's Aid. This is in 1974. And then what happened is that they then took the narrative and rewrote it into the fact that all women are innocent victims of male violence, patriarchy, etc., which is palpably ridiculous.
And it's you who I first heard the term the evil empire from. Yes. Was that your invention, that empire?
Yeah.
Because I borrow a start of it in my intro where I talk about the thousands of evil tentacles spreading around the world. And that's no exaggeration, as you know.
No, it's very like the Medusa, isn't it, with all the snakes writhing out of her head. Because one of the things that's so dangerous in the very early collectives, which were these huge collectives that we used to go to, all of us, because you have to remember that as far as women were concerned, most women, particularly in England, weren't at all politically involved in any way. And I just remember reading the Guardian newspaper, and this woman called Jill Tweedy, who subsequently became a good friend. She was a very good journalist, writing about this new movement, sisterhood. We'd stop competing against each other. We'd support each other. We'd change the world. And I was fascinated by that idea. And the sadness I felt is when I did go to these various meetings, I'd end up hearing about how marriage was a dangerous place for women and children, how the something that had to be destroyed was the family. And then I would see these ideas that we should have 24-hour nurseries. And then when I had the first group meeting in my house, because you were asked to bring in your friends, and we were told by this woman who came to the meeting that our problems weren't our isolation, because I'd said from the beginning, I'm here, like most of my friends, because we're home with our children, and nobody values us, because we could still, if we could meet and bring our children, do very valuable work in our communities. Well, that isn't what they were asking us to do. She was insisting that my problem wasn't that I was lonely and isolated. My problem was my husband. And I said, but I think I'm very lucky to be able to choose to be home and have children. Or if I want to, there's nothing to stop me going out to work. And there actually wasn't in those days. And essentially, what eventually happened is that I began to point out at these meetings that this idea that in my group, I was supposed to raise my consciousness with my fellow women to understand the oppression of males. To me, that was actually a communist ideology. That's exactly what they did in communist Russia and particularly in Maoist China. And I knew this because my father and mother had been posted to Tientsin in 1949, which is when Mao's communists took over China. And they marched up my parents' drive and put them under house arrest for 3 years with my brother. And we didn't even know whether they're alive or dead. Now, my father was a diplomat. He was part of the old consular service. And his whole life was actually devoted to dealing with communism. So I knew an awful lot more about it than anybody else. And I called them out on it. And eventually I got so vociferous that I was actually banished with this letter that's banished me from all collectives, from the Women's Liberation. Can you believe it?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Just want to remind any viewers, if you have some questions for Erin, don't be shy. Put them in the comments. I'll try to keep my eye on the comments as much as possible, and we'll try and put your questions to Erin. So that's quite a thing, an experience, Erin. And you know, you mentioned that at the time the feminists were trying to make the mothers believe that that the family and the father in particular was a danger. Marriage was a dangerous institution for women, but it has become a dangerous institution for men today.
Well, that was the whole ideology behind it. The idea was that you would disenfranchise men from the family to make the family
help destroy it.
And the new model would be women and children.
Yeah.
And even as
sorry, go ahead.
Even as early as 1990, there was a policy paper put out by the Labour Party, and our Harriet Harman, who's been a women's minister often, and is a very, very vociferous spokeswoman on the subject of women, wrote a comment which I thought actually basically put it very neatly. She said, "Men are not necessarily harmonious to family life."
Incredible.
And that's a Labour Party policy paper. So that shows you.
Now, I refer to the Democratic Party of the U.S. as the feminist party of the U.S. today, and I think that's quite accurate. They are totally dominated by feminism.
Yeah.
Would you say there's an equivalent? Is the Labour Party a feminist party of the U.K.?
The whole of the U.K.
All parties
has been infiltrated. They've had 50 years.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's so dangerous is that I'll tell you, this is really telling. We have one member of Parliament, Philip Davis.
I remember him.
Yeah, he's the only male MP to stand up for men's rights in Parliament. And I went to visit him. He's a good man. And he said, "You won't believe of the 600 and something MPs, the men that'll come up afterwards and say, 'I would like to support you, but I don't dare because I'm afraid of what would happen to me as an MP.'"
Right there is the crux of our problem, why feminism has taken over the world. It is the spinelessness of men of my generation My generation refused to stand up to even the most outrageous demands and claims of feminism. And so they've been emboldened and they've had so much success. I keep telling people on my show and other places that what men have to start learning to say no.
But it's not
Especially
very
to
well. You listen, you take on the feminist movement and you end up like I did. I live in one room. I own absolutely nothing. I'm bankrupt, which is a safe place to be because no one can do anything more to me. I've lost my homes. I've lost everything. So, and it's the same for the men. You look at the list of men from universities who've dared to even try to stand up. They're booted out.
There's not enough numbers. I'll still maintain that the only way we're going to beat feminism is to start openly opposing them in public, in the bright light of day.
Steve, it's all very well, but why answer the question of this? I don't call men spineless. I point this out socially. Women have an automatic networking mechanism, which is why we have such a powerful women's movement. Men are powerful, and I've said to so many men's groups across the world, if I ask you to build a bridge, you'd build it. But if I ask you to emotionally take care of each other, you don't know how to do it. And that's how my men's house, because almost immediately after I opened the Refuge for Women, I recognized the need for men. And I got a house, a very big house in the north of London, which was perfect. And I moved the first men who were innocent victims of their violent women partners in. But the moment they were in there, they kept saying, well, who's going to look after us? Who's going to do the cooking? And I said, well, you're going to do what the women in our refuge do. You all do it, look after each other. It didn't happen.
Things have changed a bit since then, though, I think, Erin.
Younger men, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, almost every man I know knows how to cook today.
It's all very well, but you ask them to come and demonstrate against feminism, and we're lucky if we get 100 men.
Oh, yeah. There's just not very many men who are willing to stick their neck out that far. And there's no question. Look at Warren Farrell has lost a huge amount. He's not bankrupt as far as I know, but I mean, he's been blackballed out of polite society for 40 years.
I mean, he's a good friend of mine.
Yes. Yeah. We've had conversations, the three of us together online from years ago. Still on my channel for viewers who want to see it. Let me put this little video up for you to see, Erin. This is on the topic of domestic violence and how feminists, even today, claim that domestic violence is a one-sided gender issue with men as villains and women as victims. And it doesn't seem to matter how much proof to the contrary you show, feminists will still claim it. Just have a look at this video. It's a bit outrageous. I'll just put it up on the screen here. And they will still claim.
And you see, he could easily fight her back, and he's not.
He could. Yes, he could.
Because normal men don't hit women.
No, they won't.
And normal women don't hit men. You'll find that in most of these cases, the violent people come from a generational aspect of family violence.
Yes, you've mentioned that in your book as well. You focus on the generational dimension, how it's propagated from family to family, and people learn at a young age.
Yes.
These behaviors.
Yes, that's absolutely
Has
right.
that idea gained any traction?
Yes, it has. I think this is the good news, which we need. The good news is that there are people, many young women, actually getting their PhDs and doctorates, looking at domestic violence over the last 50 years. And they're coming up with evidence-based research. That what I've said from the very beginning is that as far as domestic violence is concerned, it's a learned pattern of behavior from early childhood. So therefore, the whole patriarchy argument just goes out of the window.
Yeah.
But you have to realize this has nothing to do with victims of family violence. For as far as the women's movement was concerned, the gender feminists, it has always been a cash cow. Because by 1974 in England, the women's movement had lost most women who had originally paid to join. You paid your £3.10, which was a lot of money in those days. And you joined the movement. It was too extreme. Most women just drifted away. So they were desperate for two things: a just cause and funding. And of course, I fell into their laps, and I knew this was going to happen. And there's nothing I could do to stop it, because after that little conference where it was hijacked, I remember just sitting down with the mothers in Chiswick, and we said, well, do we want to get involved in a political fight with this new movement, or do we want to do what we need to do, which is to take care of every single mother and child that came through our front door? And it was a unanimous vote. We wanted to actually get on with what we did. And we became a very big organization, as I told you, with houses everywhere. And Chiswick was the mother house. So if a woman left the second stage houses where she shared with 4 or 5 other women, and by accident or whatever got into another violent relationship, she could always come back to the mother house. Very important part of the therapeutic intervention.
That source of stability.
Yeah.
A known place, secure house, or safe house, as they call them sometimes.
And with people that you've learned to love and trust. Because if you were a child like I was, from both parents, violent and dysfunctional, how do you learn to be loved if you've never been loved?
Yeah, it's not natural to you, for sure. I just want to acknowledge David Knox here for his generosity supporting Studio Brûlée. And I'll just read out his comment here. I'd like to thank Erin for being a voice of reason in a world of fools. Yes, exactly. Is there a way we can donate money to Erin directly? Is there a way? Do you have a...
No, I don't. And I don't have a charity or anything. And I don't need money. I'm all right. I just need more people like David, who obviously understands the issues, to spread that news. It's so vitally important, because, once you point out to people, especially men and women who, like me, have come from violence-prone backgrounds and who are destabilized by the violence that they show, who are ashamed of themselves, once you sit them down and show them the 3 generations behind them, say, look, this is what made you who you are. Great news is you can change. But if you just simply say to a man, hey, you'll be born a man, there's no chance. You're by having a Y chromosome, you're dangerous and you're a rapist. What chance is that for anybody?
No, good point.
And how condescending to tell us women that we're victims. We're not victims. We, like everybody else, we make our choices, and then we have the consequences. But if you learn to make healthy choices, you won't make dangerous relationships.
Well, that's all part of the therapeutic process, right? Which has to go on after the crisis is stabilized. Your refuge movement. Did you get into the therapeutic process with your women, your mothers?
Yeah, well, I realized very quickly that we had 2 different problems. One was women, it applies to men as well. Women who are innocent victims of their partner's violence, who by accident got into a violent relationship. And they certainly need refuge. They need lawyers. They need comfort and protection. But because they themselves have come from warm, loving families, they can easily be rehoused with their children. But the ones that I wanted to work with were ones like my mother, who had a long history of violence in her family. Well, both my parents did, actually. But a long history. And she would need long-term therapy to recover from the damage it did to her, and she did to us.
Erin, did you know, I think it's fairly understood now in the research folks in that community, that the majority of violence against children in the family is committed by the mother. Did you know that back then?
Yes, well, I knew 2 things. I knew that certainly, because I put it a different way. In many ways, how do you expect somebody who is prone to violence and can't control their frustration levels to deal with children? You can't, whether they're men or women, because they don't know how to. And the problem for violent people is that they go straight from pain and frustration to rage. They don't know how to actually sit down and learn another strategy, which is pain, frustration, and be able to talk about it. They can't. So yes, I knew then that women were far more likely because they are left with the children. But the other thing I needed to say is I knew from the very beginning that the most violent relationship you could be in is a same-sex lesbian relationship. And my argument with the women's movement is, look, this is a matter of research and facts. So if lesbian women are the most violent relationships, how can you say it's all men? But then trying to apply rational argument to what is an irrational money-raising cash cow is a waste of time.
Absolutely. Good point. I want to just touch on this question by Sean, and thank you for your support of Studio Burley, Sean. Sean's a regular here on our coffee break sessions.
Hello.
Yes. Trump, Sean is questioning, Trump has vowed to tackle academia and universities on critical race theory and feminist dogma. And he actually, I don't know if you can comment on that, because he's actually prevented or prohibited government agencies from teaching or according to critical race theory already, if my understanding.
Yes, I've been following that.
What do you think about that?
I think it's brilliant. I think it has to happen everywhere.
Yeah.
I think essentially it is unbelievable that there is a movement across the Western world of gender feminists who basically want to practice genocide on all men and boys.
Yeah. And they're open about it.
Why not?
It's sometimes I just shake my head, and there's some days when I think, I've probably seen the worst of the worst now. It can't get worse. But every single time I think that they prove me wrong, these feminists. They're incredible with their dedication to hating on men.
Well, usually you'll find, as in the case, for instance, Gloria Steinem, and actually, who is the other one? She's not necessarily been a feminist, or the Australian woman who is very well known for hating men. But what you find is that they actually have been abandoned by fathers in early childhood.
Yes, there was a fellow at the 2016 ICMI in London who wrote a book on that. Herbert, I think it's Herbert.
Yes, I can't remember his surname. Yes, he did.
Do you remember the name of the book by any chance?
No.
No, I can't remember either. But if you folks, I think I interviewed him at the ICMI 4 years ago. If you're interested in that book, it's Herbert, and I can't remember his last name. And he wrote a book detailing out exactly that issue of feminism. Most feminists had father issues.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
And that's no excuse.
No. I mean, being abused is no excuse for abusing someone else in general.
Yeah.
So, but we have certainly a huge blind spot in identifying abuse when it comes from the female side.
Well, I think but this is partly cultural as well, isn't it? Because it's men who are the worst offenders when it comes to this, because they like to put women on pedestals.
Yeah.
And when you try and get men to talk about their violent relationship, they find it so incredibly difficult, because I always think there's a loyalty gene in men.
Well, certainly there's a loyalty gene, and it's not just a gene. Sorry?
Women don't have it.
No, well, it's biological, though. It's just, well, like you say, it's a gene, but it's also culturally reinforced. Like, I can remember from as long as I can remember getting this message that you just never hit girls, and seeing the way that women are coddled, even from an early age, whereas the boys are told to suck it up right from the time you can talk and walk.
But also, in a sense, it is that chivalry gene in men that keeps them gentle and very, very careful of anybody weaker than they are, physically weaker. And, when the feminist movement then attacked that actually to ask to carry a parcel for a woman was demeaning to her, you're opening a door, demeaning to her. All those things that men did as a matter of chivalry. They lost a huge amount of really affection from men. I just think now that the hostility between men and women and the distrust has caused this massive, it's almost like a serious war between men and women. And the losers are actually the women, because at the end of the day, men are not running to marry women because they know the chances that if they do, they will lose not only their homes, but their children and access to their children.
And there's no protection for a man who ends up in a marriage gone south. All the risk is taken by the men, in my opinion, for the most part in marriage. And with all of the benefits having been removed.
Well, this is the tragedy, really, because, that my hope, I'm going to go back to me talking about this great big hope, the green shoots that I see. Now, this is somebody you should interview if you haven't already, Deborah Powney.
She's going to write her name down here, Deborah.
Powney.
Okay.
She is just about to finish her PhD, and she's one of these many young women, and Laura Bates is another one. And they are actually producing this evidence-based research that for once and for all will put an end to the feminist ideology. Now, we're hoping that this time next year, for the 50th year, there will be a conference where this research will be unveiled by speakers from many universities. And once this happens, then we will have an alternative narrative, because unfortunately, we are so stuck with the narrative for the last 50 years that there has been no other discussion because it hasn't been allowed. You can't get it on media. You can't get a television documentary made supporting what I have to say. We've been trying for the 50th year, but the television channels won't run it.
And what is that message again?
The message is that the roots of domestic violence lie in generational family,
right,
dysfunction and violence, and that is where we should be talking about and what we should be talking about, because what will happen once all this is properly researched, evidence-based figures will show that, apart from anything else, the figures that have been put out by the feminist movement for the last 50 years have no research backing at all. They're fraudulent. They're
fraudulent, yes. They've placed so many fraudulent ideas in the popular culture. It's incredible. Mm. I think of it as a kind of a gish gallop on the culture. Feminists constantly throw out a new, extremely hysterical lie, and by the time researchers have gotten around or the time to prove it wrong, they've got a dozen more lies, and these lies just stack up on top of each other.
They do.
And it's kind of a gish gallop, false argument. Have you been following the Amber Heard Johnny Depp thing at all?
Yeah, the Telegraph. It's an English newspaper. Just
came out yesterday, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they were asking me what I felt, and I told her that I'm not going to be at all popular when I tell you what I think.
Okay, we'll hear it here first, then.
Okay, what I said is, unfortunately, Johnny Depp, who has no history of violence against women, has happily married for a very long time to a woman who supports him and children who love him, got involved and into what I call an addictive relationship to a very toxic woman, Amber Heard. And yes, he did behave abominably and probably completely out of character. And even he knows that. But the result was that he lost, because there's no chance in a court of law in England to find against a woman. She admits that she threw things at him, and she was equally as violent.
She cut off part of his finger.
I know, but you see, he's the cause. He's the perpetrator.
Incredible.
I don't think I'll be making the Telegraph with my
probably not.
But it's true. It is true. And what I've always said from the very beginning, when I used to look at women who came in involved with these incredibly violent men who'd say, if you ever leave me, I'll kill you, I'll kill you, I'll kill you. They'd come in And then they say, well, I'm going back, Erin. And I said, well, why? He said he's going to kill you. And I'd look at them, and then women died that I knew and I loved. And I remember one woman is the woman who made me think. She said, Erin, if I don't hear his voice, I'll be all right. But if I hear his voice, he's like the Pied Piper, and I'll follow him. And that's exactly what happened. And she did die.
Now, there's got to be...
Stop and think, why was this happening? And then I realized addictive relationships. Now, people who have never suffered from an addictive relationship can easily poo-poo and say, oh, don't be so silly. But I know, and I've seen, and so lots of people see, people, men and women suddenly get involved in a toxic relationship and seem unable to break away and go back again and again and again. And that's when I used to say to the mothers, think of him as your pusher, your heroin pusher. The only way out of this is cold turkey. You have to stay away, like giving up cocaine or alcohol. You have to go cold turkey long enough to get it all out of your system. And then you will look at him and wonder why you ever did it.
Mm.
And that's as far as I'm concerned.
The same applies for both sexes, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yes. With men and women, I mean, we're all perfectly capable of being equally evil and violent and dangerous, as well as loving and kind.
And it's that message, what you just said right there, is quintessential to the problem of feminism. Feminism is trying to split evil as male and innocent victim as female. But when you say something that should be received as on it with a tone of, well, that's obvious, and it is obvious to a sane, rational thinking person. But in our culture, we're so dominated by feminism, especially in the West, that a lot of people will object to that obvious statement of fact.
Yeah, but you have to look at who's objecting, because the thing is, you have to recognize that if you've got a brand that really, really brings in the money, why would you risk it by saying, oh, no, women aren't necessarily victims, because then you're going to start losing your funding.
Yeah. Comes down to money for them in the end, doesn't
Always
it?
does. You follow the money, follow the money.
Follow the money, yeah.
You see, the refugees they've never been made accountable in any country. They've never had to do anything other than put the very limited amount of information about how much money they're making, the charity commissioners and whatever. But how many people go in? How many women actually return and go backwards and forwards to the refuge? How many women have you managed to actually break that addictive violence and to move on and lead peaceful lives? This is what we need to know.
Any idea from your experience what the percentage of
with us?
breakthrough?
It was high, actually. It was amazingly good. If they went through the whole program from the crisis refuge into a second stage where they weren't vulnerable anymore, but they shared with 4 or 5 other women and their children, and then they moved off into being rehoused on their own, but always had access to support. Virtually, I would say at least 60% were actually able to then move on and not reoffend. Because you have to remember in all this, women, and I've always said this, parents have choices. Men and women have choices, but children don't. They're born into a war that's not of their making.
Yeah, they're entirely captive to the situation. Here's a little comment by Zerance, and thank you so much for supporting Studio Brûlé, Zerance. He says that Better Bachelor, I think that's a TV show or something, covered a story some time ago and mentioned that vasopressin in men causes men to stay with women, while oxytocin has a kind of half-life, which means women require stimulation to stay. I'm not sure what that's coming from. Do you have any idea? You don't have to answer this if you don't know or don't want to comment on it.
I don't think it really matters what it is, what name you put to it. Addiction's addiction is addiction.
Yeah.
The things and I think we have to go to neuroscientists for this kind of discussion, but those heavy oxytocin bonding they are so
Hormone.
yeah, and it's between the mother and the child, and of course, secondly, to the father, because the primary relationships with the mother who's been carrying the baby. So when that oxytocin isn't available because the mother is incapable of mothering, so the bond's never made, you've then got a problem, which this is my idea, but I don't know if it will be proven. You've then got children who grow up to be adults who are seeking this intense, passionate bonding that they never had. And they naturally will then, unfortunately, often fall into violent relationships, which are incredibly intense. And you have to remember that a violent person very often is not always violent. And many people get involved because often, like with, for instance, men particularly, they see what I call the little bird fluttering with a broken wing. And their instinct is to rescue the bird. And a woman's instinct to rescue the battered child inside the man. And then you have to stop and think, hang on a minute. Maybe that child in the man that you're trying to rescue is dead. And then you find yourself carrying a corpse. And eventually you'll be destroyed.
Yeah. Here's a disturbing case. Whoops, that went off on me here. Just a second. Brought up by Sean. Again, thank you very much, Sean, for your support of Studio Brûlé. He was a correctional officer. I knew a young man locked up at 19 as he had sex with a powerful person's daughter who was 15. That's only 4 years difference. I know it's technically that's a, statutory rape. But he was locked up, I presume, in a very dangerous prison. He was treated as a rapist and dead his first day in. Wow.
Well, this is the difficulty, isn't it? I think we need to broaden the whole discussion on rape. And there's it is unfortunate that and he obviously wasn't aware of the repercussions of what would happen with his sexual relationship with a 15-year-old. He was 19, is that right?
Yeah.
And young and a hothead. And unfortunately, he was killed.
Now, let's contrast that to a case I'm familiar with in California. This is about 5 years ago, I think. You might be familiar with this case. A young woman at a party, a high school party or early university party, she was 17, and there was a guy there who was 18 and another guy who was 15. Or the guy and the other guy had been 17 as well, but there was an underage 15-year-old, and the girl invited both these guys into a room to have sex with both of them. The girls.
The 15-year-old boy.
The 17-year-old girl, invited the 15-year-old boy and the 17-year-old boy, both of them. To have sex with both of them. Now, the 17-year-old boy went first, and then she, I guess, then they went on to the second pairing. And part way into it, the young girl said, and these are, I think, almost word for verbatim, her words, "I think I should go home now." And the boy continued for, I think it was another 2 minutes until he terminated his things. And then I guess people found out about it. She got embarrassed about it and accused the boy of rape, and he was convicted, even though she was of adult age and he was a underage boy. Technically, she raped him, but he went to prison for rape.
Yeah, but then there are two rules, aren't there? One for women and one for men. After all, we have to remember women are innocent victims of males' violence. And we have, and the other problem that we have, and this goes on endlessly, are the epidemic of false allegations, which is what happened in this case. A false allegation, no evidence needed, and the man is outed and imprisoned, or basically ruins his life.
The boy, and there was no contestation of the facts here.
There never is. You see what happens.
But even the boy admitted that's what happened, because he didn't think there's anything wrong with it. And to be honest, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Like, she didn't say, "Stop, I don't want to anymore." She just said, "I think I should." That could be taken so many ways.
Yeah,
And
but
in the middle of sex,
it's
a
only
15-year-old boy is supposed to have the presence of mind. It seems unrealistic. But sorry, go ahead, Erin.
well, no, because we don't even know if that's what she said. I mean, there's no evidence. She just
No,
framed
but they both they both said that their stories were aligned. I think, if my memory was it. So everybody agreed on the circumstances, but they still.
Well, if she's 17, he's underage, then therefore she is the rapist.
That's where it would go if the genders were reversed, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, it would do. But then I don't think in those cases, this is a matter of ruining somebody's life. I think we've got to do. One of the things that I do hope we'll do eventually is to get most of these cases, these human relationship cases, out of courts, because this isn't where they should be. Because courts are adversarial. There has to be a winner and a loser, and in these cases, there isn't a winner or a loser.
And the feminists have expanded the definitions of sexual assault and rape so broadly now that it can almost cover any interaction between a man and a woman of any sort.
Yes, it can indeed. Yes, I mean, and there's so much bad law now, and that's the tragic part of it all.
A tangled mess. I don't know how we'd untangle all that mess at this point.
Well, what we'd have to do is to eventually, and it's got to happen, the whole of the gender feminist movement has been to be brought to its knees, the money taken away, so they can't practice.
Yeah.
What is actually totally illegal. Most of it's dishonest, apart from anything else. I don't know if you heard of the case in England talking about these allegations, where there was a young man who was on his way home to Waterloo Station, which is one of our biggest train stations, and he went home. And the next morning, there was 6 policemen at his doorstep. He found he'd been accused of sexually abusing the woman.
Yes.
Do you remember that case?
Mark Pierce. Yes.
Right.
I interviewed Mark at that same 2016 ICMI.
Right. So if I said to normal people, right, there's this allegation. What? I can't hear you. What?
Oh, I said, Mark spoke there. Am I frozen?
Yeah, you're freezing and I'm losing your speech.
Oh, okay. I think it might be from your end.
No, mine seems fine.
Just a sec. Let me see. Because everything's working good at this end for me,
okay.
But let me check.
Yeah. I'm all right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
So, what I wanted to tell
I just mentioned that Mark. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're freezing. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if there's anything I can do about it. Folks, are you hearing Erin? If mention in the comments if you're still hearing Erin there. It's my end, he says. Okay, so I don't know what could be. Check. Doesn't seem to be. Can you hear me at all, Erin?
I can hear you. It's just that you seem to be fairly frozen. Yeah, that you keep getting blurred. Anyway, I can go ahead with what I was
shut off. I'll shut off my camera, and maybe with the camera off, the voice will come through better.
Okay, I will continue saying what I was saying. So Mark, anybody normal who heard the allegation, which is that Mark walked past this woman, bumped her shoulder with his, and then inserted 3 fingers down, up under her skirt, under her trousers, up inside her, into her vagina, and then walked off. Now, most of us would just say, oh, that can't possibly happen when you're surrounded by other people. But no, because she'd made the allegation, first thing that happens, anybody who makes an allegation is assumed to be telling the truth. In this case, it was a completely false allegation. Then the woman concerned, and it's mostly women, they have protection from anonymity for the rest of their lives. The moment they make the allegation, there is money available from the Criminal Compensation Board in England, up to 50,000 that they can get. So they get paid for these allegations. Now, the good news is after all these years, only a few days ago, Mark has all this time fought against this false allegation, and he's won against the policemen. They were the railway policemen who are outside his door. He is now going to go ahead and go for the Crown Prosecution Service. We need more men like Mark who are prepared to stand up and be counted.
Absolutely. I'm going to leave my video off because I think my video is causing a problem with my slow connection here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, Mark has been at this for a very long time. I think that incident happened in 2014, and he spoke about it in 2016 at the ICMI in London. And I didn't know he was still fighting this battle today. Good on him.
Yes.
That's a lot of stamina required to do that.
Yes.
Huge amount of stamina.
And
Erin,
thank God. And
can I switch you?
Yeah.
Maybe we should say a word or two about the election today. It's a big news all around the world. Trump's up for re-election. What do you think about it?
Well, I think, as far as my life and the huge battle I've had, the one person I think who might put a stop to all this is Trump. I don't know much about American politics, but I have followed what he has done and the things that he has said. And my feeling is that the relationships between men and women and marriage will be things that he will want to actually go normalize, so that we don't feel that there's this hostility between men and women, and that this gender feminist movement has caused so much damage to family life. Until whoever gets in puts men back into family life, and it is recognized the huge amount, the need for fathers in families, nothing much is going to change. We're going to continue in this downward spiral where we discriminate and damage boys, and we elevate girls at the expense of boys.
And the Democratic Party, being the feminist party of the U.S., is committed really to along gender feminist lines to the absolute destruction of the family. Biden's agenda for women.
I don't know much about Biden.
Well, he has a very, very lengthy agenda for women, and it is, if you lifted straight out of feminist theory and made it law, there would be Biden's gender for women. So if you have a look at it sometime,
I'm just going to take a call. Hang on. Okay, it's gone.
Okay. I'll just mention to our subscribers here, our viewers, that Janice Fiamengo and I went over Biden's platform for women to some degree, but it's just enormous. Just the cost of it is incredible. The amount of money he's pouring only into women and women's issues, most of which are not as serious as the men's issues. So he's pouring more money into that. The Democratic Party of the U.S., in my opinion, has become purely the feminist party of the United States. And the Republicans, being on the conservative side, tend to favor policies that strengthen family and business. What do you think about that, Erin?
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, as far as little that I know about all this, certainly in England, we're told that there's no chance for Trump to get in, that it's definitely going to be Biden. How's it looking?
They're saying that here. I don't know. It's really too early to say anything at this point. It's just started, I think, 5 a.m. this morning with the counting. So even by the end of the day, they might not know. There's so many confusing issues about this election. But the pollsters, and of course the New York Times, are all trying to skew it in favor of Biden and have been for months and months and months.
Well, you just never do. Look at what happened with Boris Johnson. Nobody expected him to get in with a huge majority. In our last
I tend to think it's going to. Yeah, that's right. I think Trump's going to win. That's my gut feeling. But again, these things are funny. You just don't know until it's all over.
Yeah.
Well, Erin, is there anything else on your mind?
No, I just
Do you
think
want to
that
talk about today?
I just wanted, no, not really, because I just think that I'm very hopeful that this time next year we will have another interview, and I'll be able to tell you about what has happened with the evidence-based research that we've been waiting for 50 years.
Awesome. I'm going to try my camera again as we wrap up. I hope we're not waiting a whole year to have another live stream, Erin. Will you come on at least before Christmas?
Yes.
Once before Christmas?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
That'd be awesome. We can update and have a little Christmas message, maybe something on a lighter theme, and we'll know who's in the White House by then.
Yes, that'll be interesting.
It's going to be interesting no matter which way this goes. And
yes,
I mentioned to subscribers the other day
what I wanted to say.
We're blessed at least to live in interesting times. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I wanted to say, I did live, as you know, for 5 or 6 years in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I've traveled all over America lecturing for many years when I was younger. So I know America very well. And this isn't just a question of whether Trump gets in or Biden gets in. There are things that need to be fixed. And because at the moment, there's a feeling of hopelessness among the people of America as they've watched, really basically their whole moral code being destroyed, and an American home being emptied, and the children being ignored. And next time, what I'd like to talk about, or maybe we can agree this now, is parental alienation, because that is one of the ugliest domestic violent issues of our time.
I'm making a note of that right now. It is an excellent topic, and it's a topic I've never tackled on any video or live stream. So I'll have to bone up on that a bit.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Erin, for sharing this time with us.
Pleasure.
And I want to suggest to all viewers, there's several videos of Erin on the Studio Brûlé. If you Google her name or search on Studio Brûlé for Erin, you'll see interviews and lectures from the ICMI and from a Toronto domestic violence conference. Do you remember that one, Erin? With, I forget his name now, who organized it.
That was a disaster.
I'm sorry?
It was a disaster.
Yeah, it wasn't very well attended. But your speech was excellent, and it still gets, on my channel, still gets very positive comments.
Oh,
and the ICMI speech as well. So let's definitely get it together before the Christmas season, and we'll talk about Trump a little bit and parental alienation as we go into the Christmas season. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this session of Coffee with Steve. And like I like to remind everybody at the end of my sessions, do something you love every day. And if you don't have something you love, find something that you love to do, because this is your life. Even if it's the worst of times, you've got to take some enjoyment out of every single day. And with that, I'll say goodbye until next time.